In general, I advocate letting go of the past. The past is past. We don't live there anymore. It's of no use to us to stay there. Sometimes, however, I think it is good to reflect on the past, if just for a short time. We must not get stuck there. But we can examine the past and learn from it as we move forward. A priest, a rabbi, and a minister. No, it's not a joke. I just wanted to get your attention. Each one stubbed a toe on a rock in the path on which they were walking. And each one reacted the same way. Ouch! Have you ever stubbed your toe? Yeah, it hurts. Now the first man immediately threw himself to the ground and started moaning and groaning about how much his toe hurt. He cried as loud as he could so that every passerby knew how much pain he was in. After quite some time of this, he collected himself and went on his way. Several times throughout the day, however, he told someone about his ordeal. This morning I stubbed my toe on a rock, and it really hurt. You see, it's still black and blue. 2 weeks later, he came upon the same rock in the path, and he moved way out to the side of the path to avoid the rock, not wanting to stub his toe again. The second man cursed the rock and then cursed himself for being so careless as to stumble on the rock. He didn't continue to complain about his own pain once it had passed. He spent the rest of the day sitting to the side of the path so as to warn anyone who came along the path about the rock, so that no one else would stub their toe on the rock. And even though the path was a beautiful one to walk, he vowed never to walk that path again. The third man waited until his pain subsided, then picked up the rock and moved it to the side of the path, where no one else would stumble over it. As he continued on his journey, he felt gratitude for his experience, knowing that it would no doubt teach him to be a little more careful as he walked, and knowing that he could probably help someone else avoid stumbling. Now, all three of our characters experienced the same challenge, and all three took some time to reflect on their experience. The first man got stuck in the past. He didn't learn anything except how to avoid that particular rock on that particular path. The second man got stuck temporarily, but he eventually learned something that was at least useful to others, at least temporarily. The third man reflected on what had happened and came up with a lasting solution for himself and for others. We all stumble. We all feel pain at one time or another. We all grieve. And we all face challenges in life. God never promised us a rose garden all the way through this journey of life. But God has promised us that grace will be given to us. Grace upon grace. For of God's fullness we have all received grace upon grace. Let us therefore approach the throne of grace with boldness, so that we may receive mercy and find grace to help in time of need. God established this covenant of grace thousands of years ago. It is described as early as in Exodus 19. You yourselves have seen what I did in Egypt, and how I carried you on eagle's wings and brought you to myself. And this covenant of grace is not based on anything that the people have done, or will do, or must do. It is based solely on God's unconditional love for creation. We are promised the fullness of God's grace and kindness. And grace isn't something that is unique to one religious group or another. Grace is mentioned often in the writings of Christianity, but it is also mentioned in the writings of Islam and Hindu. In the Hindu writings we find this: Lord, by your grace I have reached the state of self-fulfillment. And in the writings of Islam we find this: Allah is the creator of cause and effect, so everything is referred back to His grace and mercy. The grace of God is the foundation of religious and spiritual thought. And it is God's grace that allows us to face the challenges of life and learn from them and move forward. Our first man did not fully experience God's gift of grace. Grace is not the removal of challenges. Grace is the strength to move through a challenge. Our first man didn't want to move through his challenge. He wanted to revel in it. And it was fully his choice to do so. Grace doesn't remove the stones from the path. Grace gives us the courage and the strength to recover from the injury. Our first man physically recovered from his injury, but he allowed himself to be wounded emotionally for quite some time. He got himself stuck in his misery instead of recognizing the grace that would allow him to move through it. His initial injury was long over, but he kept on reliving it, allowing himself to continually feel the pain of the stumble. He was in fact so wrapped up in his painful memory that he couldn't see any solution except to try to avoid that rock in that path when he walked it again. And the truth is that there would likely be another rock in some other path along his journey, and he would probably stumble over it and stub his toe again, and then he would have something else to complain about, and he would hold on to that until the next calamity. Our second man did a little better with his experience, but he didn't do all he could with it. He cursed the rock and he cursed himself. What good did that do? And he did some good for a few people by warning them about the rock. But after he left, the rock was still there. And no doubt it became a stumbling block for someone else. And he never walked that beautiful path again. And who knows what wonders he might have missed by not doing so. It is our third man who experienced the grace of God. He didn't waste time cursing or moaning and groaning. He recognized his own strength, given by the grace of God, to pass through the experience and learn from it. And by doing so, he had the clarity of mind to prevent others from stumbling. Psalm 94:19 reads, "And when I was burdened with worries, you comforted me and made me feel secure." Our third man accepted God's comfort and expressed his gratitude. And in learning to be more careful, he recognized that he had actually gained something from the experience. Any one of our characters may experience another calamity, another challenge. And it may be worse than stumbling on a rock in the path. Our third man will face the next challenge with more strength and more courage because he has already recognized God's grace. He will know that God's grace will be there to help him. God gives us more grace when our burdens grow greater. That's what we sang a while ago. We don't need to worry about whether or not we can face whatever challenge comes before us. When the time comes, the grace is given to comfort us and make us feel secure. But humans want to know ahead of time. We want the supplies on hand just in case. We want them right there where we can see them, right in front of our faces. We want the arms for the battle at the ready, just in case. Well, the grace is provided. It's there, and it's there ahead of time. It's prepared for us so that it can be given to us when we need it. But we don't get an inventory list, and we don't get to stockpile grace. When the Israelites were in the wilderness on their way to the promised land, they were worried about food. They wanted to know that there would be enough food to feed them each day. So God provided manna each morning, just enough for one day. And the Israelites continued to worry and complain. What if we don't get the manna tomorrow? Now, they had good reason to consider this. They weren't exactly the pictures of obedience. They might anticipate that their supply would be cut off for bad behavior. But God had promised them that there would be enough. God promised them that the manna would be there every morning, and God keeps promises. Enough grace for the task at hand. That was God's promise. No inventory, no stockpiling, just a promise. A good friend of mine named Deidre Price wrote, "This journey requires trust, devotion, and pure heart intention, and a willingness to surrender all to God I am. It is a journey through the mountains and valleys. To the degree that you can recognize this as a journey of love and completely surrender and accept it, resisting nothing on your path, it will be a journey of peace, love, and joy. It will be a journey guided by grace. But we have to be awakened to grace. We have to be aware of grace. We have to accept grace in order to experience grace. And in order to experience grace fully, we need to learn to have a quiet heart. When I was 18 years old, I found myself face to face with one of the biggest challenges of my life. When my apartment caught on fire and I was burned from head to toe. In the hospital, I was given Demerol, which is a very strong pain-killing drug, every 4 hours to relieve the pain. By the time the nurse would arrive with my injection, the pain was almost overpowering. And I would be writhing in agony. I remember one particular day, the nurse was late arriving with my injection of Demerol. She gave me my injection, but I was all tied up in my pain. And there's a funny thing about Demerol. It doesn't work unless you relax. I didn't know that then. Well, when I kept complaining about my pain, the nurse explained it to me. I had to relax somehow in order for the Demerol to work. Well, eventually I did manage to relax, if nothing else, from exhaustion. And the Demerol went right to work and relieved my pain, and I went to sleep. Grace works like that. It doesn't overpower us. God doesn't overpower us with grace. We have to accept it. We have to let it work. We have to learn to have a quiet heart, full of grace. And in order to experience God's grace fully, we also have to learn to have faith that it will be there. There's a legend about the Cherokee Indian youth's rite of passage. His father takes him into the forest and blindfolds him and leaves him alone. He's required to sit on a stump the whole night and not remove the blindfold until the rays of the morning sun shine through it. He cannot cry out to help for anyone. Once he survives the night, he is a man. He can't tell the other boys of his experience because each lad must come to manhood on his own. Well, the boys, naturally, terrified. You can hear all kinds of noises in the woods. The wind blows and the grass moves and the earth shakes. There must surely be wild beasts all around him. Maybe even some human might harm him. But he has to sit there stoically, never removing the blindfold. It is the only way he can become a man. Finally, after a horrific night, the sun appears and he removes the blindfold. It is then that he discovers his father sitting on the stump next to him. He had been at watch the entire night, protecting his son from harm. God's grace is always available to us. God is like the father watching his son go through this horrific ordeal. At any moment we may need that grace, and it will be there, quietly sitting on the stump next to us. And it will be handed to us when we need it. we have an assurance, a promise from God, that no matter what happens, we will be abundantly supplied with the grace of God. We don't need to have it on inventory. We don't need to stockpile it. It will never run out. In Lamentations 3, we read, God's loving kindnesses, which are God's graces, indeed never cease. God's compassions indeed never fail. They are new every morning. Great is God's faithfulness. God is my portion, says my soul. Therefore I have hope in God. God is good to those who wait, to the person who seeks God. It is good to wait quietly for the salvation of God. And I said at the beginning of this message that I do not advocate living in the past. There is no point in holding on to the past when it means holding on to old miseries or old challenges that really only serve as negative memories. It is good to reflect on the past, though, long enough to remember that for every challenge we have ever faced, every single one of them, God's grace has been sufficient for the day. We have survived every challenge in our lives. The very fact that we are here today tells us so. We have survived one way or another every single challenge we have ever faced. We may not have always done so gracefully, but we have always done so full of grace. God's grace has always been available in good measure to help us move through life. And even though we may not have moved through our challenges gracefully, the grace has been there to help us do so, and always will be. Sometimes we're weak, and we're unable to find our way into the fullness of God's grace. God isn't particular about that. God tells us, my grace is sufficient for you, for power is perfected in weakness. God will give us whatever amount of grace we are willing to accept, whenever we are willing to accept it. The first of our story characters today did not wait quietly for the grace of God. And as a result, he also did not have much hope for the next challenge. But the goodness of God is that the next time around, when our first man faces a new challenge, and perhaps a more difficult challenge than just a rock in his path, God's grace will still be there, waiting to help him and comfort him in that challenge. There is no punishment to the man for refusing to accept God's grace the first time around. There's simply more grace than we can ever imagine. More grace than he could ever need, ready to be given when the time is at hand. God gives us more grace when our burdens grow greater. God sends us more strength when our labors increase. To added afflictions, God adds more mercy. To multiplied trials, God multiplies peace. God's love has no limit. God's grace has no measure God's power has no boundary. For out of the infinite riches of heaven, God gives to us, and 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 gives to us again, and again, and again, and again, and again, and again. Isaiah 40 says, "Do you not know? Have you not heard? The everlasting God, the Lord, the creator of the ends of the earth, does not become weary or tired. God's understanding is inscrutable. God gives strength to the weary, and to the one who lacks might, God increases power. Though youths grow weary and tired, and the vigorous young ones stumble badly, yet those who wait for the Lord will gain new strength. They will mount up with wings like eagles. They will run and not get tired. They will walk and not become weary." What a wonderful promise of grace that is. Whatever challenges we face in this journey of life, we will mount up with wings like eagles, run and not get tired, walk and not become weary. Have you ever gone through a real trauma in your life? Can you look back now in reflection and see God's grace lifting you through that trial? Maybe it wasn't easy. And maybe at the time you didn't feel like you were being lifted on the wings of eagles. But you survived. Did you not? Looking back now, do you not see the strength that was given to you to survive some traumatic ordeal? That was God's grace. For those of us who have experienced what we see as a great deal of trauma in our lives, the picture is often more clear. We know that we could not have survived on our own. There had to be something working within us, behind us, and around us to carry us through. People sometimes ask me how I managed to survive a fire and still be thankful for life. I ask them, what choice did I have? The only other choice was to die. No thank you. Oh, I could moan and groan about everything that I went through, and I could hang on to the drama, and I could get lots of sympathy. I could carry that baggage around every day and never bother to see the goodness in my life. Again, I say, no thank you. I prefer instead to look back at the good part. The part where God knelt down next to me and handed me a pile of grace that got me through the pain to the other side. I prefer to reflect on the experience of grace, not the experience of pain. Now, I would prefer not to go through something like that again, but I know if I ever face such a challenge, there is a loving God who will give me the strength that I need when I need it to do what I have to do. And to that, I say, thank you, yes. God took care of me through some pretty dark days in my life. And God will take care of you, too. That is a promise we can count on. A woman named Sibylla Martin wrote the words to this song of assurance. Be not dismayed, whate'er betide, God will take care of you. Beneath the wings of God's love abide, God will take care of you. Through days of toil, when heart doth fail, God will take care of you. When dangers fierce your path assail, God will take care of you. All you may need, God will provide. Nothing you ask will be denied. No matter what may be the test, lean, weary one, upon God's breast. God will take care of you through every day or all the way. God will take care of you. God's grace is amazing grace. Accept it. Count on it. And be grateful for it. Let's close in prayer. God, we thank you for your amazing grace. How sweet it is. How wonderful it is. And at times we may not feel worthy of your grace, but we know that by your very creation of us, you have made us worthy. By your grace, you have made us worthy. And so we accept your grace to help us through every moment of our lives in sufficient measure for each day as it comes. In sufficient measure for each challenge as we face it. We will mount up on eagle's wings by your grace. Amen. And so it is.